Hello, friends. I'm back. Happy Friday. I want to continue with reviewing COVID-19, The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab and Thierry. I can't pronounce his name. Why do I always have a hard time with this gentleman's name? Thierry Malleret. Called him Thierry. Thierry Malleret. Okay. I got to remember that. If you remember last time I went up to page 31 and now I'm on page 40. I read another 10 pages. So I'm almost halfway through. It's only 110 pages long. I'm just going to go through my notes. I know that if you recommend a book to somebody, you can recommend it to 100 people. About one person, less than 5 will download it. And of those that download it, again, 1 out of 100 will actually read it. So I know that I'm only, if 1,000 people see my video recommendation, maybe 1 will read it. So if I do the notes, if I share the notes with you, maybe that, so you don't have to read it. And then you'll have an idea about what it's all about, right? But if you do read it, great. If you don't, it's not a big deal. The reason why I read it or am reading it is because of the recommendation from Malone. And he really hits the nail on the head. If you haven't signed up for his email newsletter, I'd highly recommend it. I'm going to put a link to Robert Malone's email newsletter because he really understands all this stuff a lot better than I do. So at the last time I was talking about the book and it was getting into depressing things, these next 10 pages are even more depressing. It's like something written by some kind of diabolical global plan that would be from a fiction. And the problem with this is that it's not fiction, right? It's put out by a real person presenting their ideas. And so he talks a bit about deflation or inflation, which one is going to be happening. And they're actually arguing for deflationary at some point. But then as they say, inflation is inevitable. So there's a lot of contradictory information that comes out in this book. They said that it's going to be transferring wealth from the rich to the poor. But then they contradict it immediately and say, no, it's going to be transferring wealth from the poor to the rich, which we know has actually happened through the pandemic. So let me just go through my notes here so I don't forget. On page 32, they're hinting at a U.S. dollar collapse. This whole thing with the U.S. dollar collapsing, they're making it sound like it's inevitable. And what may replace that is they're hinting at digital currencies. China has already started to create its own digital currency. Whether it's going to be cryptocurrency, aka Bitcoin, or not, they don't discuss that. And again, that's totally up in the air. I'm expecting Bitcoin to dip down to 28K US, was my prediction from the high of 59 last November, to clear up a lot of leveraged assets in that space, and then it would return back up again. But that's still a highly risky situation because that whole thing could be shut down and switch over to nation-centered cryptocurrencies. But I'm not going to discuss that because they don't discuss it that much in the book anyway. They say here I'm saying page 34, first and foremost, the post-pandemic era will usher in a period of massive wealth redistribution from the rich to the poor and from capital to labor. Now, I don't know if this is a typo in the book or not, because that doesn't make sense, because on page 35, they say, one seriously misleading cliche about the coronavirus resides in the metaphor of COVID-19 as a great leveler. The reality is quite the opposite. COVID-19 has exacerbated, I can't even pronounce that word, exacerbated pre-existing conditions of inequality wherever and whenever it strikes. As such, it is not a leveler, neither medically or economically or socially or psychologically. The pandemic in reality is a great unequalizer that has compounded disparities in income, wealth, and opportunity. So on page 34, they say, oh, it's going to redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor. No, they immediately contradicts that in the very next page, saying that the pandemic has compounded disparities in income, wealth, and opportunity. And so they're giving a lot of mixed signals in this portion of the book. I don't know if they're doing that on purpose to try and confuse the reader, right? It's the kind of crab in the bucket concept. You have the bucket full of, you shake it up and they start fighting each other, sort of thing. So it's almost like it's promoting confusion. I read a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Blink, and he talks about word hypnosis. And there could be using some of that in this book. They're trying to hypnotize the reader, to confuse the reader, and to cause chaos and confusion. It's a running theme throughout this book that I've seen so far, that they're kind of looking forward to, almost drooling over the concept of chaos and confusion, disrupting everything to affect their great reset. They're resetting everything by wanting to tear everything down, is the underlying theme of the book so far from what I've seen. Page 36, let's move on. Drug makers and hospitals will be more powerful and wealthier than ever, quote from the book, to the disadvantage of the poorest segments of the population. In addition, ultra-accommodative monetary policies pursued around the world will increase wealth inequalities by fueling asset prices, most notably in financial markets and property. Well, they got that right. Property prices have definitely gone up. However, moving beyond the immediate future, the trend could reverse and provoke the opposite. Less inequality. No, it's not going to happen. How might that happen? It could be if enough people are sufficiently outraged by the glaring injustice of the preferential treatment enjoyed exclusively by the rich, that it provokes a broad societal backlash. In the U.S., a majority of very vocal minority may demand national or community control over healthcare, while in Europe, underfunding of the health system will no longer be politically acceptable. Inequalities could therefore decline, but if history is any guide, the optimistic scenario is unlikely to prevail without massive social turmoil first. So again, very confusing message in this particular paragraph that I pulled out in my notes. So they're saying one thing, and then they're saying the opposite, and they're saying maybe this, maybe that, or, blah, blah, blah. Those who are left hopeless, jobless, and without assets could easily turn against those who are better off. Already, some 30% of Americans have zero or negative wealth. If more people emerge from the current crisis with neither money nor jobs nor access to health care, and if these people become desperate and angry, such scenes as the recent escape of prisoners in Italy or the looting that followed Hurricane Katrina become more commonplace. If governments have to resort to using paramilitary or military forces to quell riots or attacks on properties, societies could begin to disintegrate. And then on page 37, they talk about BLM. Specific situations of turmoil cannot be forecasted, but can, however, be anticipated. Again, trying to hypnotize the reader. We don't know if this is going to happen, but we can anticipate that it's going to happen. Oh, we can't anticipate it, but we can predict it. They're trying to say two things at the same time, right? And you can tell that they're trying to instigate these type of social unrest, social turmoil. And if you look at history, this is a common strategy of communist takeover, is to tear down the existing structure. It's no wonder that we see support for specific groups and not other types of groups. The type of groups that want to create chaos and disruption, they want to support those groups because they feel that those groups can help tear down the existing infrastructure so that they can be easier to implement their new global infrastructure, their new global control, increase of power of the totalitarian state that'll come in and clear out all the traditional leadership structures. So page 38, they continue on this theme. One of the great lessons of the past 5 centuries in Europe and America is this: acute crises contribute to boosting the power of the state. So they admit it, right? They say acute crises contribute to boosting the power of the state as they, think about it out loud. They're thinking out loud. It's always been the case, and there is no reason why it should be different with the COVID-19 pandemic. The response to major crises have always further consolidated the power of the state, starting with taxation, they say. As in the past, the social rationale and political justification underlying the increases in taxation will be based upon the narrative of there's countries at war. Now we see that they've shifted. Since this was published in June of 2020, they've already moved into what they're talking about here in the book, that they're going to try and increase taxation because, well, there's countries at war out there, Russia and Ukraine at war. So we have to increase taxation because all these crises are happening. These crises are happening. And so we got to increase taxes to address these shortcomings here and there. And the other thing, it's a torturous thing to read. This whole thing is like pulling fingernails to try and read this stuff. It's gross. Canada introduced income tax in 1917 as a temporary measure to finance the war, and then expanded it dramatically during World War II with a flat 20% surtax. And they eventually increased, of course, right? High marginal tax rates. The great implementation of global communism and total state control. That should be, I wrote that down as a suggested title for the book. After reaching page 40, I said a better title for this book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, would be The Great Implementation of Global Communism and Total State Control, because that's really what it's describing. That would be a good title for this book. Page 39, I wrote down here, a nightmare for a libertarian, as a description of that page. And here's a quote from that page. Looking to the future, governments will most likely, but with different degrees of intensity, decide that it's not in the best interest of society to rewrite some of the rules of the game and permanently increase their role. Governments will decide that it's in the best interest of society to rewrite some of the rules of the game and permanently increase their role. This is what they're saying, right? It's a handbook for the government to cause these crises, present them to the people, saying this is a crisis. We have to increase our control. We have to increase taxation. This is what they're advocating. This is what the book advocates. It's a megalomaniac thinking out loud. Even as we emerge from this crisis, we should be aware that some other crisis surely lurks around the corner. We can't predict when the next one will look like, other than it will look different from the last. This is what they're saying. This is what, the guy's saying in the book from page 41 now. Now they start talking about there's going to be a demand for a better social contract, they call it. Social contract is simply the agreement between the population and the existing government. So they're saying we're going to need a new social contract. The pandemic will mark a turning point by accelerating this transition. It has crystallized the issue and made a return to pre-pandemic status quo impossible. So returning to the pre-pandemic status quo, they say, oh, that's impossible now. We've got to have a new social contract between the government and the citizenry, and the government is going to expand its power. It's going to expand its taxation because of all the crises that are happening in the world. And this is exactly what we see happening over the past 2 years. One crisis after another crisis after another crisis. Another aspect is critical for social contracts is currently growing concern to fight against the pandemic. Future ones will lead to the creation. There is currently growing concern that the fight against this pandemic and future ones will lead to the creation of permanent surveillance societies. Then they have a bit of a nebulous discussion in between there, and they finish by saying, expect it to be a prominent component of future discussions about what our social contract should look like. So they don't let the cat totally out of the bag, but they certainly tip their hand, right? They're saying there's concern that might be permanent surveillance society, but we'll have to discuss this in the future in terms of the social contract. So in other words, people are going to have to agree to a new social contract. We don't know what it's like. Some people think it might involve permanent surveillance. Put two and two together. And then just to finish up where I finished reading to this point, that was as much as I could take in one day. Otherwise, I'm going to be so depressed I'll have to throw up. Is they targeting the youth. And so I took some notes on that. I'll just finish with this quickly. Youth activism is increasing worldwide. This is a quote from the book. Being revolutionized by social media that increases mobilization to an extent that would have been impossible before. It takes many different forms, ranging from non-institutionalized political participation to demonstrations and protests, and addresses issues as diverse as climate change, economic reform, gender equality, and LGBTQ rights. The young generation is firmly at the vanguard of social change. There is little doubt that they will be the catalyst for change and a source of critical momentum for the Great Reset. You see what this is here? They want to emphasize these issues: climate change, gender equality, LGBTQ rights, to the young generation so that they can use the young generation as a catalyst for change and a source of critical momentum for the Great Reset. They said it. I didn't say it. That's what's a quote from the book. So that was all I could take for today. That's all I want to share with you today. Otherwise, this is going to be a very depressing video. But it's kind of like you got to take a shower after reading it. You know what I mean? I remember reading, what can I compare it to? When I was young, I would read Hunter S. Thompson, right? Some of his writing, you gotta clean yourself afterwards because you've been through a swamp. Well, he was writing fiction, right? Gonzo journalism, and he was doing stories of debauchery and all kinds of crazy stuff. And so after reading it, you're like, okay, I gotta separate that. But this, you almost can't clean yourself after because it's not fiction. They're writing this book as a manifesto that they're presenting to the world. And the people that are behind this book is what makes it so painful to read. And that is the World Economic Forum. As Robert Malone said in his message, he said, who's the World Economic Forum and why is it so important? Why should we be worried about the World Economic Forum? And so he gave a list. He said all the members, 100 members, they are private, so you can't look them up. However, he did give a list of people that have gone through their training programs. They have 2 training programs, the Young Global Leaders and the Global Leaders of Tomorrow program. Some is a 1-year program, some is a 2-year program, and they've changed it over the years and so on and so forth. But he does list, and so from Robert Malone's research, I pulled out the list of Canadian members that have gone through, not members of the group of 100 per se, because that's kept private and secret, but the people that have gone through these Young Global Leaders of Tomorrow or the Global Leaders of Tomorrow program, whatever they call them. There's a few different programs. And so I pulled out the Canadian names, and I thought I would just share quickly a few of them with you. Liam Sobey, the VP of merchandising for Sobeys. I thought that was kind of interesting. Just the ones that I recognize. There's a bunch of names here that I don't recognize. Michelle Romanov, wasn't she on the Dragon's Den? She went through the Young Global Leaders of Tomorrow program. I'll just go through a few that I'm hoping that I recognize and I hope you might recognize as well. Christine Stewart, Managing Director of Twitter Canada. That's interesting, with what's going on with Twitter. Let's quickly go through here. Mark Kaelberger, he was the, oh no, I'm thinking of the other guy, but he's on there too, the founder of the We Charity. This fellow is the founder of the Free the Children Foundation or something like that. Charities. Jean Charest. Okay, Jean Charest went through the Global Leadership Training Program in 1994. Sheila Copps, you might recognize that name. Chrystia Freeland went through the Global Leaders of Tomorrow program in the year 2000. Interesting. Justin Trudeau, well, we know, yeah, he went through in 2005 as the Young Global Leader of Tomorrow program or what have you. And Klaus Schwab boasts about how he has Justin Trudeau in his pocket. Who else here might you recognize in this name list of Canadians that have gone through? Melanie Joly, right? Minister of Foreign Affairs, Canada. Michelle Rempel Garner, or Michelle Rempel, MP. I believe she's a conservative MP. Andrew Scheer, right? MP. He went through in 2019. Mariam Monsef, she's the Minister for Women and Gender Equality. You recognize that name. There he is. Craig Kielburger. He founded the We Charity. Funny how he, is in there with all these other Canadians. Who else? Jagmeet Singh, right? Jagmeet Singh went through the program in 2018, the Young Global Leaders Program, and a few other names that you may. There's like 80 names on here of Canadians that have gone through the World Economic Forum training program. So to know who's involved. In my last video, I said, yeah, we lost World War III to the Chinese. Well, we lost it to the World Economic Forum, and who directs and controls the World Economic Forum, right? High-ranking people in corporate America, as well as China, United States, etc., etc. But these people have essentially signed on, and you can, like I said, I'll put a link to Robert Malone's list. His email list. You might want to sign up for his newsletter. He has a very good newsletter that comes out almost daily of his research, and he definitely understands the World Economic Forum, and he understands this book and the importance of this book, COVID-19, The Great Reset. So again, I've reached up to page 41. Where am I here now? I'm on page 41, and I'll try and get through this in the next little while. Actually, I'm on page, I finished on page 43. That last quote I did about youth, the youth was from page 43. So I'm on page 44, and it's going to be talking about geopolitical unrest, so I'll cover that in my next video. But in the meantime, I was talking a bit about the importance of reading, right? Scripture tells us that getting wasted is dissipation, right? If you drink too much alcohol, it dissipates your life. In other words, it dilutes it. Reading, I find, is like a concentration of life, or a distillation. The beauty of reading is that you can experience the high points of a person's life, and you're distilling it into a short, brief synopsis that you can absorb, so you can experience the best of someone else's life. And I like stuff like, Brian Tracy, Bob Proctor, these, the motivational guys, right? Napoleon Hill, Anthony Robbins, all that kind of stuff. You're distilling life into an inspirational message that you can absorb. Whereas reading something like this is painful, and it's going through the mud. And so it reminds me of a scripture in John where Christ said that you're clean because of the words that I spoke to you. So words can have a cleansing effect. If you want to get clean from reading, read the Gospel of John, right? It has a cleansing effect on the soul. This book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, it has a darkening effect on the soul. It's like, this is what's planned. This is what they think they can achieve. This is what they are stirring up the pot and causing all this chaos and crises. And it's a very depressing read, I must say, to say the least. But I like the idea of reading as something that can not just improve a person's life. I mean, I always say good memories make a good life, but good books make a good life. Good books can cleanse your soul and concentrate. It brings a sharper focus, and it can It's a concentration, a distillation. It would be the opposite of time spent on a video game, for example. You do a video game, it adds absolutely nothing to your life. Or I shouldn't say that, because maybe there's a lot of gamers that get something out of it. I don't know. But or reading something that's very bad for you. I don't know what I could describe it as. I've read in my young days. I read Richard Marchenko. Right? It's or like I mentioned already earlier, Hunter S. Thompson. Things that you have to wash off after you've read them, because they are taking you through the mud of life. And I guess you can benefit from that as well. But I just would leave you with that. If you want to clean your heart and your mind, the first three Gospels, they can not torment your soul, but they can stir up your soul. And then the fourth Gospel can save your soul, right? John, right? That's the quote that I mentioned earlier, where Christ said, "You're clean because of the words that I spoke to you." You read the Gospel of John and it cleanses your soul. You're like, wow, I didn't know that God loves me. I didn't know that Christ came to save the world, not to condemn the world. And those things jump out at you, and you experience a spiritual rebirth after reading that. And so, ancient scriptures is one of the most valuable things that we can do for our souls, for our mind, for our hearts. But other things, these current things that are coming at us every day, that we want to keep abreast of, we want to keep on top of, we want to maintain awareness of what's going on. It's impossible to keep up with all the information, because there's so much information coming at us from all different directions that we think, oh, how can I keep up? I want to read that, I want to read that. You end up having 10 tabs open, and you end up reading nothing at the end of the day. And so just the ability to block everything out and say, okay, I'm going to get through this book, read it, take notes on it as I read, so that I'll have a memory of it. This is like going through a brush fire, and afterwards you still have the smell of smoke on you. And you say, yeah, I lived through that fire. I read that. I read it, but I don't want to go back there ever again. And so I'm hoping to get through the rest of this book and finish it up. I don't know if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about this book. I wanted to mention those people from the World Economic Forum for you. And I wanted to talk about the cleansing effect of the Gospel of John. And so that's all I wanted to talk about today. I won't waste any more of your time. I really appreciate you watching this video. I thank you very much. I love you very much. I hope you have a fantastic day. And I'll add that link to Robert Malone's daily newsletter sign up, because he's the one that got me to read this book in the first place. And hopefully I can get through the rest of the book in the next couple of days. I'm on page 44. There's 110 pages, so it should take me maximum another 6 days and minimum 2 or 3 days. So I'd like to get rid of it, get it out of here, so I don't have to deal with it ever again. But if it goes downhill from here, it's not going to be pretty. Thank you for watching. God bless you. Have a great day. Bye now. Bye-bye. Bye.